Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talent Smart EQ's LinkedIn Live series, Emotional Intelligence for Your Everyday Life. As you are all getting comfortable, grabbing a cup of coffee, or maybe it's your lunch, we'd love to know where you're calling in from. So over in the comments section, which is to the right, feel free to tell us who you are, where you're calling from, what neck of the woods are you in. We have a great show, and we just think it's going to be a great 45-minute discussion with my guests, who I will introduce in just a minute. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask them to share where they are coming in. Jean, where in the neck of the woods are you?
I'm based here in San Diego, kind of the other side of the country from where you are based.
Yes, way on this. That's true. Excellent. And Cher, where are you today?
I'm also in San Diego, a little bit north of where Jean is, but also, same city, just further north.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I'm on the East Coast. I'm normally in Pittsburgh, and a lot of you who join us every month for this know that. But today I happen to be in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm on my way to the beach for the holiday weekend. So I'm coming from there. That's why my background, in case any of you are watching, notice that it's a little bit different. But we do have a really special episode today. Besides this being the 2-year anniversary of this LinkedIn Live series, Emotional Intelligence for Your Everyday Life, it is also a really exciting anniversary of the 2-year anniversary of Team Emotional Intelligence 2.0. We're going to be talking about the book and about the program. So it's a great day all around that we're going to be talking about that. Before I introduce my guests, I want to make sure that you all remember that Talent Smart EQ, we're the world premier provider of emotional intelligence assessments and programming. We are global. So meaning around the world, we can help you out with any of your emotional intelligence needs. So as you're going through today, please feel free to ask questions, grab onto our information that our producer will put into the chat throughout our discussion today. But I'm going to get started and introduce my guests. And thank you, Stacy. First one on to say hello from San Diego. So happy that you're with us. I'm going to introduce who we have for this very special 2-year anniversary edition. First off, Dr. Sherry Duchok is Director of Training here at Talent Smart. Sherry has been with us for 4.5 years, but quite honestly, much longer than that, because she started working with us prior to even coming on as a full-time person with us. I'm going to guess it's probably about 11 years now.
Yeah, about 11.
Mm-hmm. Is that about right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she's had the opportunity to not only deliver our team's programs, but she's also one of the contributors of the book. Welcome, Dr. Duchok.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
And we also have Dr. Jean Greaves. And so extra special having Dr. Greaves today because she was my very first guest on emotional intelligence for your everyday life. So it's kind of like bringing it back full circle. And she is the founder of Talent Smart and also the author of several emotional intelligence books, such as Emotional Intelligence 2.0 and the one that we're here to talk about today, Teen Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And it's just exciting that both of those kind of correspond with each other. So I see some more people coming on. Thank you so much. Esther from Northern California. Everybody else, whoever's coming on, please join us and get ready to be part of this conversation. And let's get started with what we're going to talk about. So Team Emotional Intelligence 2.0. Jean, remind us, where did this idea come from for the book? What was that journey like?
Well, surprisingly enough, research about teams has been around for about 100 years. We did not know that when we started our work in emotional intelligence itself. However, really early in the stages of our organization, we had clients saying, this is all great. What do we do about how our team is interacting? And so from the very start, we dug in a little bit and discovered, we really do need to develop an assessment for the group to be able to assess how the group is interacting with one another and performing. So the assessment has been around easily 20 years. I think it was within the first 2 to 3 years that we launched that assessment. And over time, we were able to dip into the database and look at what the trends were for high-performing teams, and also what were the typical behaviors and things that teams that were really, really struggling, how did those look and sound like? So it really came time to pull that all together and share our insights with our world. Yeah, so 2 years ago, that's what we put in. We dipped back into the research, gave sort of a background on all of that for anyone looking. And this is a compilation of the know-how of all these teams out there in the world who have been working on this for a good couple of decades.
Yeah, I love that, you didn't jump in right away whenever you maybe weren't quite sure what to do with all of that. It sounds like that's what this was about, was like, let's figure this out before we put this amazing book together. And now here it is, and 2 years later. How cool, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So Sherry, we both had the privilege of being contributors on the book. Again, Jean, thank you for asking us and a couple of our other peers. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the journey of working on the book, because I certainly have my sort of things, but like, share us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we each had our own very different journey, but the exciting thing about it was how collaborative it was.
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved is, as you know, David, and certainly Jean, the longer you work in this field, you kind of see the world through this veil of EQ. Doesn't mean we're always perfect, but you can spot your own behaviors and other behaviors through that EQ lens. And so what's exciting for me is to see things, and we all did, whether it was in sports or nature or something we saw in an office setting, and that inspired us. And then we use that inspiration as the framework and the jumping off point for these strategies that then became very practical strategies for teams to use. So I think we had a luxury that a lot of writers don't, that we had Jean at the helm.
Yeah.
So she was always going to make sure the book flowed and the voices complemented each other. But we really had that latitude to see the world through EQ and be inspired and write the way we write. So that was exciting.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I can still remember whenever we each got our assignments, right? We were working on the different strategies. And for me, I had a panic attack at one point. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, what is, like, they're all crazy that they've asked me to be a part of this. And I got talked off the ledge. But you're so right. Like, it was so great to be able to sometimes call you, Jean, and say, I'm lost. I just don't know even what to do with this. And you used emotional intelligence with us, by the way. And we're like, take a deep breath. And you really kind of led us, and really, you weren't letting us off the hook. So I think that's part of, like, I just really resonated with what Sherry said about having you as that guide. And that helped, because I was able to get through that journey. And being honest too, because I was sitting at home a couple times working on some of the pieces and thought, I just don't know that I'm doing any good work here. And then you would turn around and give us all that support. Do you remember some of that, Jean?
I do. Well, one of the things I knew is both of you were spending time in sessions with teams out in companies from across industries. But you also have a lifetime of experiences and interests, things you really know about how to speak about. And so to be able to take that interest and use an analogy and think about, like, if you're sitting with a team and they're struggling with this strategy, what would you say? And then we'll make sure that it's research linked, right? It's bound by what we know on how the brain works and what researchers have found in their studies with teams themselves. So, so I never had a moment where I didn't think you could tap into exactly what that strategy needed. So your nerves never like went over to me, right? I was just
right. Oh, and I think we all could tell that too, because we all had different moments of different needs. But I think that was the key that we all did get to, was that we've all worked on teams throughout our careers, whether it was in life, in extracurricular activities, at companies, or whatever that looked like. I think that was so helpful. And, it's 2 years now after the release. And thank you for a couple other people who've joined in. Will, nice to see you from Minneapolis, and Rich in Kansas City. And please, anybody who has questions or comments, feel free to ask them to either Sherry or Jean. But I'm wondering, Sherry, like, how's the book evolved in your mind when you think about now that we have the book in place and we use it with the program that we're going to talk about in a little bit? But evolution wise, where's your head with it now?
Well, I'll tell you, when you talk about evolution, I kind of had the two prongs going, because one is our own team. prior to the book coming out, we had the honor of Jean running the teams program for our team.
Mm-hmm.
And what we discovered there was really interesting about how our team functions and how it works. And so I think that on that personal journey, the last 2 years of really focusing on that strategy, deepening the bonds with external teams, has been very powerful, increasing and coming up with stronger partnerships with people
Mm-hmm.
outside of our team. So that, I think, has been the personal journey for our team. But from a standpoint of facilitating for everybody else, I will tell you, I think I always knew it was powerful, but the tool and the solutions has become so much more powerful as I've watched teams in action. I've seen what comes of it. I've seen their responses and the outcomes. And also, when people go through individual EQ and I'm hearing some things being said, it's like individual EQ, it's been our staple for so long and it's terrific, but there are some things it doesn't address. And so being able to offer that solution to people who are looking for something even more and beyond the individual EQ has just been so powerful.
Yeah, nicely said. I totally agree with the whole idea of like looking at it even from our own team. So Jean, sort of the same question for you. You've authored several books that are so important in the emotional intelligence world. When you think about this book 2 years later for you, where does it fit in your thoughts about how important this book is, since we're talking about emotional intelligence in a slightly different context? Have your thoughts about team emotional intelligence 2.0 also evolved? Talk to us a little bit about.
Yeah, when we first dove into this, having known that the assessment had been around a good 20 years, I thought, well, maybe the field of books is already flooded.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, still to this day, when you Google books about teams, there's so much of a focus on the team leader or on how to lead a team. So I think there's a very special place for this 2 years in for any team member to say, but yeah, what do I do very specifically day to day or in response to a specific challenge that I'm feeling with a coworker who's on my team? Where do I go to give me specific ideas for what I can do to contribute to getting out of being stuck, or to get the momentum going, or to help us turn around? So I think it has its place in being able to be actionable. And when I hear from teams who are implementing it, I'm always really delighted and surprised about how they hone in on one or two really specific strategies that come across as a very simple thing that you might overlook as, oh, everybody knows how to do that, right? One reader, and as I think I mentioned to you, David, a financial planning team up in the Bay Area, they took the strategy of doing a team retreat, but they did it in a really planful way after reading that strategy, and stayed local, went and stayed at a hotel, and from 5 o'clock on, they had dinner together, and then just the next morning, so they had breakfast together and then a morning session, and in a day and a half, they had such deeper discussions than their team had been having that they decided to do sort of a repeat brunch at least once a quarter, if not more often. And I thought, okay, there's an example of a team who's taking one specific strategy and sticking with it and going deeper and getting the benefits over time. Whereas I also really like the evolution of people saying, no, let's, as a team, work through all of these strategies at our team meetings. There happen to be 53 strategies, so that can take a whole year. Or if you slow down, you could do 6 months on just being more aware as a team of the emotions that surface, and then the second 6 months on how you manage those. And you could take this through your team work probably for 2 years.
Yeah.
So the evolution is that it's actionable and very relevant, and you can kind of pick it up and put it down as needed.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and it kind of like leads into, we have, this fantastic program that we offer talents, here at Talent Smart. It's emotional intelligence for teams. So we have the individual, level 1 program, level 2, but this is really using the assessment that you talked about, as well as the book. We use the book in the class too. So from your perspective, how is the teams program and the concept different from other programs that we have here, since this is focused on the team? So besides the obvious, right, of that it works for teams, where do you see that there's a difference?
Is that for me or for Jean? That's for Jean, right?
That's for Jean, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I thought so. I thought she looked at me, and I'm like, I think that's for you.
Well, certainly, you can either use it as a launching point as, okay, EQ, I don't want to get scored for myself. I'm scared to find that out. So let's all jump into this as a group first and then launch into individual development afterward. Mm-hmm. But so many of our clients have been working on their individual EQ skills, but they really are sitting around the table doing a project together, and they're still facing dynamics that feel like they're a little more complex, and diving in after that and saying, okay, collectively as a group, how do we take responsibility for understanding and monitoring our patterns as a team? So sequentially, you can do it in either way. But the work of the team program is very different than the individual. I can certainly let Sherry or even you, David, share a little bit about that. So it doesn't feel repetitive.
Yeah, and that's a great call, because I think that's where, I think sometimes when people ask the question, what's the difference? It really is the concept of the skills. And so I was going to turn over to Sherry and say, let's get into the program just a little bit for everybody who wants to hear. So really, what is the difference? So would you mind giving us, maybe share like a high level view of like the 4 core skills of team EQ, and and what teams can expect to experience differently than what they would in the individual EQ pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I first just want to add, I love Jean's example of the retreat. And although I was working with a team that didn't do a retreat, but I came in to facilitate the program. And I thought you'd find this interesting, Jean, because we had some tough moments in that group. I definitely had to put on my coach and mediator hat when people got very transparent and real. But one of the guys who was involved in one of these tense moments, at the end of the session, he said, oh my gosh, we've worked together 6 months, but I feel like we just had 50 first dates because we learned so much from each other. And so it's, even if it's not that offsite retreat, just that focus that it brings. And that really is what we're talking about with the distinction, David. When we talk about our level 1 individual EQ, we're talking about 4 skills that are divided into personal competence and social competence. How are we with ourselves and how are we with others? But I remember very distinctly being on a call with Jean and her co-author, Evan, and Sue, one of the other contributors, really trying to frame these 4 skills. How do we frame them? They're not personal and social, but how do we frame them? And what it really comes down to with the team is, how do we feel and how do we connect? So under how do we feel, the 2 skills are emotion awareness and emotion management. So do we know what emotions are circulating in our team at any given time? And then how do we manage those emotions so that we're most effective as a team? And then the how we connect piece, the 2 skills are internal relationships and external relationships. So how are we connecting internally as a team? And then what do we do externally, which I'll tell you, working with clients has become so important, because I'm hearing people say we need to break down the silos, and we're more of a matrix organization now, and we don't want the hierarchies, and we have to collaborate. And these are all terms we're hearing all the time. And so that connection piece, both internally and externally, is key for effectiveness as well. So those are the 4 skills in teams versus individual.
Yeah, thank you for breaking that down. And Jean, I'm curious from you, the 4 team core skills that Sherry just shared, from where did they come? Knowing that you needed to differentiate them from the individual, like how did you kind of get to that place to be able to put a divider? Because I would say that when I have people in classes I do, they see the distinction. How did you kind of get to that place?
Well, the distinction does get discussed in various research studies over the decades. There's no standard 4-box model in that body of research that I would say. However, when they talk about, say, building a concept of a we mindset, you're already very much discussing internal relationships, how one-on-one different pairs or triads or the whole team interact with one another. And it's not just when people are sitting around a table or on a Zoom call, it's
Yeah.
over chat and over email or picking up the phone, or even in the hallways. All of those moments are the material for that very specific type of interaction. So you begin seeing that, oh, that's a cluster of skill sets that look very different than when a team is becoming aware of the moods and emotions that surface. One thing that we did borrow heavily from in the field of EQ is that awareness work is fundamentally very different kind of work together. It's thoughtful, it's quiet, it's listening, than the type of work you're doing when you're strengthening relationships, where you're reaching out and bonding and having important conversations. So we knew we had to differentiate it that way. But the difference is you can see the thing that's not uniquely there is this idea of social awareness, right? Because you're already operating at a team level, even in the original emotion awareness, the fundamental skill. That's almost your self and social awareness operating together. But the one other unique piece of this that I don't think exists anywhere else is the team to team relationships. And I have a hard time finding a chapter on that anywhere in other books that are out there. And if you've ever been a team member and you've been asked to go sort of visit this other department and attend their team meeting, you have wildly different experiences on how you're welcomed or ignored, or and I think there are teams that don't mean to be exclusive or rude, but they have literally never spent time thinking through, how do we welcome in a guest? How do we treat them while they're in our midst? And who on our team is going to play host or walk them out to the door and thank them for being there? So the more specific we could get in how teams interact with other teams, I think was a real contribution to a discussion that teams should be having maybe on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, and that's such a great call out of like, how do we function fully? Because that's the difference I've seen, even doing the program, that sometimes it's about, well, somebody else will handle that because that's not in my wheelhouse. But we may not even realize that that's not in somebody's wheelhouse if we haven't had a discussion about it, right?
Yes, yes.
So, Sherry, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about just for everybody who's listening in. So who's the program for? Who do we recommend? And what else participants can actually expect to get out of this that might be different regarding takeaways, even from Team EQ as compared to anything else that we do?
Yeah, absolutely, David. We recommend this program for intact teams that are working together regularly as a team. And then also for any cross-functional teams that maybe are working, and it may be just on a certain project, but as long as it's at least through a series of, some months, then a cross-functional team that's working together. The key is it has to be a group that is functioning in a way that they can have a shared action plan, a shared set of norms that they can hold each other accountable for. So those are the guidelines. And I'll tell you, one of the things, I don't know if you've run into this too, David, but in running these programs, as you said, for almost 11 years, I've often run into the situation in individual EQ where a team leader sends someone to be fixed. Like they single out one person on their team and they say, well, we'll send them to individual EQ, we'll get them fixed, and then the team will function better.
Yeah.
And what I really find in planning calls and listening and talking to the parties is there's really more of a systemic issue within the team. There's a team dynamic that's going on, and it's not just that one individual. And so when we can get the whole team in and really strip everybody of title and rank and talk about what are the dynamics here, what's going on, how do we communicate, when do we not communicate, what does stress do for us, and we can get them all in these intact and cross-functional teams. We can see their challenges or their gaps, and then what they take away with, to answer the last part of your question, is a development plan that really addresses what are those opportunities and gaps for them, what do they agree that they're going to work on in terms of strategies that will have the biggest impact. And then when we do get together, what are our norms of behavior?
Yeah.
How are we going to exist with each other, communicate with each other, give each other feedback, call each other when we need to? How are we going to do all that in an agreed fashion? And then the part that I love so much from Jean is, and also, how are we going to gently hold each other accountable to these things?
Right.
Because the takeaway only means so much if you're actively using it and giving each other feedback and seeing what you need to nurture or change or where you need to pivot. So that's what we're really looking for with a team.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving that distinction. For any of you who've been working with our individual programs, I mean, that's really the essence. Is this is now greater than the individual, right? This is about how do you bring this group together. So share, I think it'd be helpful just to even share with our listeners, some of like the feedback from participants and clients that we've done programs for. I know you've done several, I've done many programs, both of us, over the last couple of years. Why don't you share something that you actually have that you would like everybody to hear about? And if anybody, by the way, who's on has gone through the program or is a facilitator of the program and has anything to share, please feel free to do that. Or if you have a question about it as well, we'd love to hear it. Gotcha.
Yeah. I would say one of the most, they're all powerful. I already shared the guy who said, we just had these dates and now we know each other so much better. But I think one of the biggest recent takeaways that I heard was about the psychological safety in the room that hadn't existed prior to the program. And what I've seen with a lot of clients who are ready to dive into conflict management and inclusion and culture shifts and change and diversity and all these topics, they're, to quote the old proverb, they're putting the cart before the horse many times. Mm-hmm. Because if you bring these discussions to a group that doesn't feel that there are norms of behavior, safe ways to talk, safe ways to give feedback and hold each other accountable, then they are more reticent to even speak up about these other issues or implement the tools that they talk about. And I had a very powerful discussion with a team recently, and I had, diversity in my room. And it was so powerful when they started opening up and just getting very real about how the concept of EQ landed on them and what that meant about what they had to hide or show from their culture of origin, and just really powerful conversations. And I walked away knowing they were now primed to tackle the tough stuff.
Yeah.
Really tackle it in ways that a lot of teams are not. You can't just, slap some of these topics on a team and say, this is going to fix it. You've got to develop the trust. You've got to develop those conversations. And I think they were all probably as blown away as I was at the transparency and the openness and the safety that was created in that room to help them take on the next steps.
Yeah, well, you made me think of it. Oh, go ahead, Jean.
The thing that I like about what occurred in the room is, when you're on a team, you seem to think we all have to be a good team member, and the definition of a good team member is the same for all, and it's just not. Mm-hmm. And the great news about that is you don't have to shoulder everything. If you are the one who gets nervous talking in a group or speaking up or calling someone on something because that's not what occurred in your family growing up, that's okay, because there can be another team member who is very familiar with how to do that. And once you all know that about each other, it's like, okay, well, who in your darkest moment as a team knows how to crack the joke that will just alleviate the stress in the room, right? Not everybody's funny, but the one funny person can be really appreciated. So you find all those things out, and now you don't have to be afraid of an emotion surfacing in the room, because somebody among your group will know how to address it or let it move through and away and out of the room. So, you can let that happen. That diversity becomes all the different little skill sets that can show.
Well, and Jean, that links directly to, the conversations we've had about how you can have people with individual high EQ on a team, but not necessarily have a team that's operating with high EQ. And it's because all those little strengths and things that people bring to the table have to have a safe space for them to feel like they can use them. And I know you and I have talked about, if David's really high in social awareness, but he's not on a team where he feels like he can share what he's seeing and observing, then not only are we not capitalizing and learning from what he does, but he's probably very frustrated because he's seeing a lot of things that he can't articulate and share to make the team better. So, David, I'm sure you've had powerful experiences too.
Yeah, well, that was really well put from both of you. I love that, because it made me think about a team that I worked with probably about a year ago. It was a C-suite, the top 6 executives. They decided to go to one of their satellite offices in Toronto, Canada, which was exciting because I'd never been there, by the way. And we got together, and the CEO was newer. She'd been there for about a year and a half, and she was struggling with still getting the team to work together. She had a combination of some of the people that were still on her team that had been there for a long time and worked out through the previous CEO, and a couple that she had brought in with her. And what was interesting was we finally broke through the whole piece. Some of them were still working under the old regime's kind of thought process, right? Like, you will only share when I ask you to share. That was the old regime. And she had a very different philosophy. It was like, bring it onto the table and then we'll all talk about it. And so some of these people were used to, from a norm perspective, only like, I have to raise my hand or I have to be asked to share. And it was an aha moment in the room when the CEO found out that somebody happens to be really great at something. And she's like, how did I not know this? And the others were like, yeah, I didn't know that. And one of the guys who had been there for a while said, well, I mean, I guess I've always known that because we've worked together for 20 years. And they were just talking about these silos that were all sitting in the room here. So the breakthrough for them was kind of what you said, Jean, was like, what do we know about each other? And what do we not know about each other? But how do we open the silos up also so that we work more functionally? Because individually, I will say, as I met each of them, and even like on the break, they all seemed like they had individually very nice, emotional intelligence. But then you could see that there was this dysfunction as a team about how they were interacting, like a little bit of walking on eggshells, but not the CEO. Like, you would have thought the CEO was creating that, and she was. It was a very interesting dynamic. So we walked out of there with these development plans. So, Cher, like you talked about, they walk out with, here's the things that we're going to work on. And they really, before we left, we spent an extra hour of time because they didn't want to wait for their next meeting to sit down and talk about what's it going to look like to work on this. They said, no. First of all, do you have an extra hour, David? I was like, sure, because we had broken through. And they sat there and literally worked through the 3 biggest issues that they discovered. And here's what we should do for each of these so that we can start rocking and rolling on it. And they had never had team norms. I find, and Cher, I don't know if you find this, I find a lot of teams don't even know what that is.
Yes.
Like, they say to themselves, what do you mean by a team norm? I'm like, well, I'm going to make your lives a lot easier here.
Yes.
By coming up with, this is how we just want to show up with each other. And I love that in the program, we give you starters, right? Like, here's some options, but like, come up with some of your own stuff. That can be in itself, I see, a game changer for a team. Just to be able to say, this is how we're going to show up with each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know if any of you that are listening in right now have any examples of your own team norms of where you've worked before. Would love to hear that. But that for me also, because I only worked at one company where we encouraged team norms within teams. And when I went to the company after that and I asked that out loud, they were like, what are you talking about? I just think that that's such that critical piece to be able to help each other out with how we should show up with each other too.
Well,
So,
and that reminds me of two really interesting points that I've discovered over time, which is for the teams who never discuss it, there
yeah,
are some norms that are likely driving how that team operates and they don't even know. So
so true.
in this program, they get to go back and become the creators of the ones that they really want to get their arms around. And the
Mhm.
other thing that reminded me of is when we did look into the 2 decades of data that teams had discussed, and if you're from the world of employee satisfaction surveys,
Yeah,
so many times you'll read comments that say, I just wish people would leave their feelings, out of the discussions because
right.
they just get in the way. And this book is here to say to every team, don't even bother trying to do that because it's not physically possible. By the
Yeah,
time you've ever had a thought or an awareness of an emotion, the emotion physically has already happened. So if you're operating at a team level, now you've got like 8 or 5 or 10 people's moods interacting with one another.
yeah,
So you can just put aside any hope of leaving the feelings out of the work that the team has to grapple with. And you can just begin, okay, the first step is just be more aware of our habits and which moods get in our way. Are we the kind of team that's going to sit around and mope when we don't get approved for a particular project, or are we going to get it out of our system and move on and sort of laugh about it later? It's like every team
yeah.
has this type of pattern that's unique to them. And so a lot of the fun work is just getting to know your group patterns, not just getting to know each other as individuals.
Yeah, well, and I think that's such a great call because you could say, who is the person that's going to bring us back from the dark side, where we're all
Yeah.
mad or upset about something? Somebody on that team probably is able to say, okay, we have 5 more minutes to complain about this.
Yeah.
And then we're done, right? And so if if you're not acknowledging that, like that's how you're using your team benefits there. I mean, and that's a beautiful place, I think, of saying, Gene, I'm just curious to you, like, ultimately for you, what is it that you hope people who actually read the Team Emotional Intelligence 2.0 book walk away with? And I'm just talking about not coming to a class that Sherry or I or Josh or one of our other peers. What do you hope people come away with if I just grab the book and read it?
Well, I think I have maybe 2. One is that you're going to have this aha that you don't have to be the team leader to be able to step in and contribute a correcting of course in
Yeah,
key moment. You're going to feel empowered as a team member of that. Oh, yeah, I'm new on this team, but there's all kinds of things I can do to contribute to the momentum and the outcomes. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to be that stealth team member that's waiting for the moment that needs me to step in. And I'm going to try that strategy that I think I'm good at. And then the other thing I think is I hope that readers realize that this book is kind of the way you think of a cookbook with lots of different menus. There are soups and salads and main courses. So if you have a really substantive problem and you need an idea for how to tackle it, there are going to be strategies in there or recipes for how
yeah,
to really get started on getting to the core of that issue. Or if you just want to top off a particular tough week with something that's really appreciated and fun. Like, have you ever sat around after a huge mistake and really debriefed about it and decided, what are we going to do differently? There's, a strategy for that too. So
yeah.
I'm hoping that people realize this is a resource that just to pull off the shelf once in a while and skim through, where's that strategy that I think that could be useful?
Yeah, I love that perspective because it is set up for those of you who have read Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's very set up similarly so that you can use it as that resource book. I'm famous for in classes saying, let me show you the book. And this side here, I'm always like, here's your resource. You go to the 4 skills and they're in here and all the strategies are there. So I can quickly find my way to what I need. And so that's the other beauty of how the book is set up. great question, by the way, that's in here before I ask, share a question here. But from Stacy, if Alexis, I would love for you to, how, either one of you that want to answer this, how do you think about team values versus team EQ norms? Thank you, Stacy, for that question.
Well, I'll just kick this off. Team values are a foundation. They're a fairly deep discussion. What do we value? And then the norms stem from that of, well, if we value listening, right, what is going to be one of our norms for when someone has the floor for expressing their, opinion? And maybe somebody else wants to jump in and say, oh, I have a response to that. A third team member could just very kindly say, we totally want to hear it, but let's hear out, Jerry on finishing their thought first, but we won't forget, and we're going to ask you about it. That's an example of a norm helping you kind of implement the values that are important. How about you, Sherry? Have you seen this?
Yeah, I'll just add to that I see some clients where they have values, and then some clients who have actually taken it a step further, which I think is important, which is, what do these values look like? What are the behaviors that back up these values? And I think that's where the overlap with the norms start to come in, because if you value innovation, then we've got to look at, okay, what are the norms around brainstorming and creativity in our team? How do we do that in a way that's productive, where we're not stepping on each other's toes? So I think the value, frames it, and then the norms step in to more clearly articulate what those behaviors look like to achieve the value.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning that a behavior is literally what someone says or does. Right? You can see it or you hear it. And it can include what you don't say or don't do in a moment. So norms are more about the behaviors that represent these deeper values that are good words, they're descriptive words, but innovation in one company culture can look very different than innovation in another. So you have to get to the norms and the behaviors.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And thank you, Stacey, for the question. Sherry, question for you is, so I hear this in classes that I do, I'm sure you do as well, but for anybody who's a leader of people, why should they consider looking at the Team EQ program as opposed to bringing just good old individual emotional intelligence? Why? What's your best elevator speech for that?
My best speech is times are always a changing, and what I hear all the time is, we want to attract the best and the brightest, but they're different generations and they think differently. And, they ask us why, and then we get defensive because, why? What do you mean why? We're telling you to do it. And so if you're going to keep moving forward and grow as an organization and a team and a company, you've got to recognize that every new person that comes in is bringing in a different world. So when you have that intact team, you've got to open up the dialogue, or otherwise you're not going to have the innovation. You're not going to have the conversations. You're not going to be able to handle conflict. And if you can't get everybody in and kind of level that playing field and say, this is who we are and this is how we can be most effective and most productive, then you're just going to be grabbing at the latest shiny thing and thinking that's going to be the answer or fix to a more valuable and stronger team. And so I think that's my elevator pitch is, you gotta do it.
There are very few industries or types of work that are done solo, right? So because you have to get things accomplished with other people, this team emotional intelligence really offers any group very specific things that help them sort of realize their potential as a group. And make it fun and meaningful, right? You spend hours and hours at work. Why not enjoy the people that you're working with?
I agree. Thank you both for that. So I know we wanted to give a couple of books away. Jean and Sherry, who do you want to send a book to?
I want to send one to Stacy, because I think that was such a great question about team values versus norms. And so I think Stacy should get a book.
Awesome. Stacy, you're going to be getting a book. Our producer is going to be connecting with you to get your information. Jean, who would you like to give a book to?
Well, I'm going to give one to Tim because I appreciate anyone who's grabbing a new insight and being excited to do something with it. So, Tim, I hope
Yes.
there are other strategies that you'll find insightful.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you both. Look for a message from our producer, Jean and Sherry. Thank you so very much for sharing your perspectives about this. And just like really sharing in this 2-year anniversary of both the book and this show. I do want to remind everybody who's tuned in, whether you're watching this for the live or you're going to watch this on the recording later on, that if there's anything that you're interested in tapping into emotional intelligence for your organization, for solutions, give us a buzz. There is our information that we have put over here in the comment section, and just get a hold of us on our website. We are a global organization and we would love to be part of your success. I do want to make sure I thank all the people who have made this show, especially for the past 2 years, a success. All of the guests that we've had over the last couple of years, the leadership here at Talent Smart, and the producers. And right now, our producer in the background, who's been with me now for a little over 6 months, Alexis, thank you for all of your hard work. We're planning to continue for a lot longer, and I want to bring a lot more amazing people to bring emotional intelligence to the world. We're going to be back, by the way, on June 27th with our next emotional intelligence for your everyday life. We're going to be following up with an exciting project that Talent Smart has partnered up with West Virginia's law enforcement community. So if anybody got to hear this a few months ago, we are bringing back a couple of the key players. Our VP of Law Enforcement and Government will be back with us, Dr. Gregory Campbell, and he's going to share some of that and what's next in the pipeline for them. Until then, thank you all so much. Have a great holiday weekend. And remember, EQ is for your everyday life. We'll see you the next time.